Hello, everyone. It's 7 p.m. It's Friday, and I'm so happy we can meet each other on a third session of Global Academy of Conscious Politics. And hello, Adam. Hello, Catherine. Hello, Aman. Hello, Lubka. And this is also hello to Zlatimira and to Olivier. Olivier is on his way to do it, and Zlatimira couldn't make it. But I hope we will enjoy the listening and you will enjoy the recording. And I'm very happy Andrea left, but as he comes, we're going to go today through an exciting topic, the first political topic, which is lobbying. So we are moving from a part of a consciousness and professionalism in politics to really technicalities, and Adam is happy about that. So
no, I meant like because you said we're moving from consciousness. I was hoping that it could be in lobbying, but Andrea probably knows more than me.
Yeah, I hope it will be conscious lobbying as well. But yeah, we will go more into the technicalities because Andrea is great in technicalities a lot in terms of lobbying, but he's also a citizen activist, I would say, more than private corporate lobbyist. What's that? Oh, wow. What is it, Adam? You can share with us. Look, Andrea, have a look at this class. Look at her.
And he's the most famous lobbyist in Brussels, I think. So.
He's a lobbyist, Adam?
Yes, he's one of the most famous. He's also a professor at the College of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And being a pioneer of lobbying, basically. He's publishing a lot about the theory of lobbying and also very practical. Like, this is a guide actually how to do lobbying in Brussels. But it would be very different probably from what Andrea thinks is more focused on companies, not so much on NGOs.
And Catherine, you also had some book with you. Oh. You had this kind of book. What's that book about?
Does what it says on the tin. Lobbying for change.
Maybe to explain to Aman, who hasn't read it and hasn't heard about that.
No, in my country, conscious lobbying is an oxymoron.
So I'm gonna give it like my summary of being halfway through, and this is Andrea's organization, so he can share more. But what I'm really getting from this book, this is about citizens, like citizens lobbying, and the power of like the power that citizens have that they don't actually know they have, and because they just don't know. So it's really like an education. It's really a wonderful education for citizens who just want to do more than vote every couple of years or so, but actually, practical things they can do to make a difference in the things that matter to them. And from my perspective as a future politician and a future candidate, it's inspiring me to actually co-create with my constituents conscious citizenship. Because actually, being an elected representative, I don't want to be an elected representative for like sheep. I want to be an elected representative for people who like want to lobby themselves. So that's my summary of my own personal discoveries from it.
And this was fantastic, I think, introduction to Andrea Bocuni, who is Catherine with us today and who is our amazing mentor tonight, but also a friend and ally of conscious politics. And Andrea is also one of the, I would say you are not the founder, but you are really in the founding and working out the Good Lobby, which is the organization that really helps and promotes good lobbying and citizens lobbying and teaches people how to make it. And you recently arrived from Malta, where you are also helping on very difficult issues, how to connect diverse cultures and also diverse nations and lobby for good change. So I cannot imagine better person and much more proved expert with us tonight as Andrea. And Andrea is also innovator and is Italian, so he can bring also a lot of flavor of really how to sense the stuff. So I'm very happy you are with us today. And this is also welcome to Olivier, who has just joined. So Andrea, floor is yours. And definitely let's interact together and let's create this session the most like useful for us all.
Andrea, thank you very much. I am flattered. Thank you again. Thank you for the chance that you guys are giving me. And thank you for the energy and the spirit you put in literally every project you're working on. So as Andrea correctly pointed out, we've been knowing each other for a few different projects. A good example of this interaction is that the book that Catherine just showed, at page 4, if I'm not mistaken, mention your name. So actually this combination and this connection between our two organizations comes very far. I would love to take exactly from when you guys started, because the point of having an organization that is called the Good Lobby is precisely be an icebreaker. So be precisely and purposefully, let's say, I want to poke your intelligence and I want to stimulate your understanding of politics, knowing that lobbying may have a bad connotation, which absolutely has. Do let me know if I'm clear. My connection is the best I could get, but in case you see it's lagging out, in case my voice breaks down, just let me know, and we see as we see how it goes as we go. Just quickly, thank you for having had such a passionate reaction on the concept of lobbying. Adam, yes, everybody in Brussels knows Daniel. He is a pioneer if today was 1980. I think that guy opened up the floor for having lobbying a bit more understood by the general public. But I would say that's a very 80s style. And the guy was also associated with a whole bunch of lobbying action. They are very traditional in many ways. So it's good that you could point immediately at an example of actual lobbying, but I think there's more interesting stuff around. And also to take on Aman's comment, yeah, possibly it can be an oxymoron, but it's what makes it fascinating. If there is something that I want you to bring home, is that lobbying, it's not bad in and out of itself, it's just a tool. And as such, it can be used in any possible way by every possible actor in many different circumstances. I would then like to start with the presentation. If you have any question, initial remarks, or any other things I should include in the agenda, let me know now. Okay, I'm sharing the screen.
I think we can start.
Very well.
Perfect.
You do see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, so I will just start with a quick introduction of myself. My name is Andrea Boccuni. I've been working as a lobbyist for around 7 years now. I live in Brussels, and I've been mostly dealing with European politics. So I do have elements of difference of styles and lobbying approaches in different parts of the world. Brazil, US, Japan, but my favorite cup of tea is the EU. So that's the area where I most developed my skills. I am working as head of partnership at the Good Lobby, and the Good Lobby is a civic startup that teaches lobby to other NGOs. So recognizing that the role of NGO is crucial and understanding that they have an impact, we figured that they are better good than good at their job. Because most of the time, NGOs lack of advocacy skills, advocacy capacity, or the personnel to carry out successful lobbying. Even though I am working for a social startup, I also happen to be a corporate lobbyist, which gives me the chance to have a full broad understanding of what lobbying means and how that translates into different policy areas. Now, I'd like to start by asking, or actually to test your understanding of lobbying before, because otherwise it will be just a whole bunch of nonsense. So I would like to ask you, and this is a video so I can use this, raise your hand if you think Coca-Cola lobbies. Are you guys following me? No, stop.
We are following you. Can you see us, Andrea?
Not really. Okay.
But we can see
Okay,
you. We all raised the hands, so we all raised the hands.
Okay, so now raise your hand if you think the Catholic Church lobbies.
Adam, 2 hands, Aman 1, mine 1, and Catherine 1. And I think
Fair enough.
Luke as well.
That's a very common example. Churches lobbies a lot, for example, not to be or to be recognized as a religious organization, which means a lot of tax deduction. This is why Scientology is so strong in lobbying. Now, raise your hand if you think cities lobby, actual cities.
Cities, yeah.
Are you guys?
Everyone is, no, like Adam.
If you think about cities, if you think about the Olympic Games.
Yes, we all are raising the hands.
Yeah, so think about the Olympic Games, think about Winter Games, think about European Capital of Culture. So these are all situations where cities or regions or municipalities might just simply lobby to get a big pot of money. Final question, raise your hand if you think citizens can lobby.
Yeah. Everyone is raising.
Now, that's sort of exactly the point. By now, you might have figured that lobbying is pervasive, happens everywhere at any time, and as a matter of fact, it's just a way of communicating. Let's see. How guys, do you define lobbying? That's an open question, so feel free just to answer.
For me, I think of it as the process of enrollment, like the process of engaging with people, institutions, with an idea to get their buy-in to make the ideas happen.
And so this is marketing, right? You just described marketing.
Catherine, can you maybe explain the enrollment, because not many people are familiar with that word, as well.
Yeah, when I say enrollment, to me it's a little bit deeper than marketing. Like, to me, marketing is like selling something, whereas enrollment to me is more like engaging with hearts and minds over to see a new possibility for the good of society.
You just described storytelling.
You've just described, sorry, I didn't catch the last bit.
Maybe you just described storytelling then.
But storytelling is like a one-way process, whereas to me, enrollment is a two-way process.
Okay, so you define lobbying as the two-sided process of engaging hearts and minds for a certain goal.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other definition?
I think his video just got frozen. Is it just me or is it working for you guys?
No, Andrea got frozen, seems like that. But if you have any definition on lobbying that you experience yourself, it's recording, so it's good also for the other to watch. Yes, you are back.
I think he's back, yeah.
You know, Aman or Adam, you can even write in chat. That's good, Catherine. So if you have any your opinion of lobbying, you can just share.
Yeah, for me, if I may, I think, to put it simply, for me, lobbying is ensuring that an idea is transformed into legislation.
Mhm.
And this could be an idea of an NGO, this could be an idea of a company,
Do you guys still
of a city.
follow my share?
Do you want to continue, Adam? Or was that finished for you?
I think that was it. No,
Aman, do you have other?
was it broken down or?
No, I heard you clearly. And then I heard silence, so I didn't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I try to give it one sentence definition. From what I observe while being a lobbyist too, is we try to, when you really think of it broadly, it's just passing or ensuring that a thought or an idea is in the end transformed into a legislative text. You could say, yes, you argue. I think for me, for example,
exactly
the difference
it.
between,
That's bingo. So lobbying is just a communication tool. It's part of the broader domain of public affairs, governmental affairs, public relations. But in order to be qualified as lobbying, exactly as you mentioned, ultimately it wants. Hello?
Now
yeah,
you're clear.
Now we can hear you. Perfect.
Okay. I got lost a second. So Adam, you had you gave a fantastic definition. Do you guys hear me all?
Yes.
Yes.
yep.
Have we again?
Yes, indeed. The definition of lobbying, or to be qualified as lobby, you want to change the law. That's basically possibly the only difference. Another difference would be that indeed the recipient of your lobby action will be a legislative maker, so a policy maker. So indeed, at the end of the day, you want to change the law. Now, when I was asking you whether you believe it's possible to have citizen lobbying, it's because we have fantastic examples of that. Are you familiar with this guy?
Is that Mark Zuckerberg's friend who didn't get in on the deal?
Let's say this is a person that gave a couple of headache to Mark Zuckerberg.
Who is this guy?
Here before you, you see Max Schrems. He is a lawyer and a student of law that in his 22, very young, traveled to US for studying. And there he realized how impactful and mischievous is Facebook use of our data. So when he came back to Europe, he had his campaign crowdfunded and nailed Facebook on its use of data. Max procedure started what we know today as the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, or the most comprehensive and inclusive piece of regulation governing data worldwide. It's a beautiful example. It's almost a textbook example of citizen lobbying because this guy is just a dude. He's just alone. I think today he's 25, so he's not a full-blown professional. He's a person that using his own capacity and his own understanding of the law used legal, administrative, and political tools to hold a corporation accountable, which in many ways resembles the David versus Goliath sort of approach because, you know, Facebook is still Facebook. Do you guys happen to know this gentleman?
I hope he takes the sugar out of those drinks.
Correct. That's pretty much what he did. Alejandro Calvillo is a Mexican activist. He used to be the president of Greenpeace in Mexico, and he figured something really important. Basically, Between 2000 and 2006, Vicente Fox, two Mexican presidents ago, Vicente Fox, who used to be a top manager of Coca-Cola. So when he came to office, he made in a way that many events, public events, sport events, were actually Coca-Cola branded. This brought to a massive consume of carbonated drinks in Mexico that brought child obesity from 11% to 46% in 4 years. That was unprecedented. So much so that he pushed Mr. Calvillo in fundraising and pushing for his own NGO, El Poder del Consumidor, Power to Consumer, introducing in a Mexican debate elements of consumer protection that are really, really far from their legislator. That being said, in 2008, he managed successfully to introduce the so-called soda tax, so a surcharge that comes with food and with soft beverage that basically redress the externalities in public health that are impacted by food and beverage industries. I think these are two fantastic examples of citizen lobbying again. In many ways, organizations may or may not have the resources and the capacity to follow up on certain specific issues. And that's why, and that's how citizens can help. And that's the underpinning point of my presentation. What if civil society had the same resource and access that Coca-Cola has? What if Coca-Cola and a certain NGO could have the same access to policymaker and legislator? What if NGO and corporation could team up to follow up the public interest? Any questions so far?
Can I add one of my favorite examples of citizen lobbying?
Yes, please.
The EU mobile phone roaming. For years, I used to get really, really mad every time I travel in Europe, like how much I'd get charged on my mobile phones. And it was through reading the example in this book that I learned that a citizen lobbied to have the same tariffs in all of the EU. And one day I went to Italy and was like, oh, hey, it's the same as the UK now. Great. But I didn't know it was because of the citizen lobbying that made it a reality.
The end of roaming charges has been a long, long battle. Indeed, I was very happy and honored to be part of the team that pushed this legislation forward. It's obviously fair to say that also many other actors contribute to this discussion, many member states. But yes, we can finally talk to each other a bit cheaper, in a bit cheaper manner than we could before. And that's possibly one of the, those 3-4 good things that actually Europe achieved and can be bragging about. Now, the Good Lobby Act in this space in two ways. The first one is by matchmaking law firms and NGOs. A great way of lobbying starts by knowing your law, knowing the legislative environments that you want to impact. We found that because of lack of resources, lack of capacity, or for many other reasons, many NGOs don't have lawyers on staff. And when they do use lawyers, they do it because of admin. So maybe they need a contract, maybe they need salaries. It's very different when NGOs team up with lawyers in their pro bono capacity for strategic actions. The second area is education and training, so that's a bit more my cup of tea, because this is basically going member state by member state, organization by organization, to teach and to get the pulse of what's the need of NGOs in terms of advocacy and lobbying. Had been said, we provide NGOs with a toolkit, and this toolkit is for them to know what to do. In fact, NGOs are many of them are very good at their job, so we don't go there teaching them how to campaign. But we might want to help them understanding certain tweaks and tricks of the political elements. Our paradigm is that better informed citizen makes better policy making. If people know where to look at, if people know the tools to hold institutions accountable, if people know how to read a budget, if people know how to interpret the law, who watch the watchers. So policy making tends to be a bit more inclusive, tends to be a bit more transparent, tends to be a bit more cost effective. Up until now, the Good Lobby built a community of around 10,000 citizen lobbyists. We provide pro bono assistance, roughly 15 to 20 cases a year, and we go around giving workshops. That says 20 workshops in 12 countries. That's 1 year ago. I think we make it now 40 workshops in 15 countries by now. Now, what do we do? Katrina, thank you again for bringing this example on the table. Indeed, the Good Lobby was the first, we filed the first European Citizen Initiative ever. The European Citizen Initiative is basically a gigantic petition. It's a petition that has certain criteria. You need to gather 1 million signatures in at least 7 member states. And once you do that, it forces the institution to take into consideration your policy options. That's a beautiful example of how to mobilize people to a concrete goal. You might not all know this gentleman, José Barroso, the former president of the European Commission. Basically, Barroso wanted to go work for Goldman Sachs immediately after he terminated his mandate as the president of the Commission. And we figured that that's a bit unethical given the role that Goldman Sachs and other organization in the financial sector had in the financial crisis in 2008. So we filed a complaint to the European Secretary General, and that stopped Barroso to go work for Goldman. Here we have another example, Antoine Deltour. You might know, those who are in Europe, that soon after the current president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, was elected, a little scandal impacted the small state of Luxembourg, which is in fact in many ways a fiscal heaven. And a few whistleblowers, including Antoine Deltour, wanted to name and shame this behavior. Well, it turns out that in Europe, there are no whistleblowing policies. So we work together with Transparency International, an NGO that works for transparency, to draft the law that was then adopted as whistleblowing policy in the EU. That's a classical example of legal drafting that is needed to strengthen NGO strategy. Last but not least, we were very active in the glyphosate debate. For those of you who are not in the EU, glyphosate is a pesticide which happens to be reauthorized in their use. And the party of the Greens wanted to know what were the liability of disclosing certain private information on the market. We gave them the legal assessment on their activity. They were able to push their strategy forward. So these are just examples. These are just examples of the kind of needs that NGOs might need, that citizens might need, and how institutions respond to this input from society. Here are just a bunch of NGOs we work with. I mentioned Transparency International, European Public Health Alliance, the Consumer Organization, Wikimedia Foundation, and so forth. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of my contribution, I have a job today, and my job is threefold. The first point is I need you guys to consider the fact that lobbying is neither good or bad. It just happens to be a tool, depending who uses it, when, and how. I also would like to suggest that although it's boring, gray, and possibly tiring, legal and administrative staff are actually key. This is what makes the difference between a good campaign and a bad campaign. I don't care if your organization has 20,000 people on Twitter. If you're not changing the law, if you don't impact systemically, you're just making another campaign. Last but not least, citizens have the power of influencing policymaking on a bigger scale. And most of the time, they don't really know they can. And that's sort of why we want to go out there to explain it. This is not really our job. It should be the state job or NGO's job to tell people. But what we saw is that citizens are hungry for information. They're hungry for participation. So they could make a good use of these tools. So normally, I give a workshop on this stuff. So I stop talking at a certain point and I ask the participants of the workshop to provide me with their project, with their ideas. I challenge NGOs to rework their business model, for example. But this usually takes a good couple of hours. In this session, which will be a bit shorter, I want to introduce the advocacy toolkit, which is the whole bunch of instruments you can use impactfully in your strategy. and sort of elaborate on your project. Maybe not for you all, maybe we can just choose one, but I think it makes a lot of sense when you can attach practical element to this kind of thing. Very good. So before I present the toolkit, any questions so far? Anything that isn't clear? Can you all hear me well? Very well.
Olivier has a question.
Now, let's get down.
Andrea, Olivier
Excuse
has
me?
a question. Olivier has a question.
Yes,
Yes, Olivier.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea, for the presentation. This is very interesting. As Andrea said, I'm Olivier, and I'm from Africa, basically, and now I'm based in France. This is one of the discussions we have been having in the human rights circle when advocating or lobbying for human rights in this era nowadays. I mean, it's not mainly the states, the governments that are being the major actors for national law violation. Because we do have these big corporations that are using, for instance, in the just take an example for international law violations or international crimes. There are big corporations that are using private security forces, for instance, and in the international law, states have agreed that we do have treaties that regulate international law when it comes to governments and to states members. But when it comes to private sector, it's getting more difficult to get the responsibility for foreign private groups intervening, for instance, or committing violences, for instance, in a foreign land. It's a little bit difficult to get the right jurisdictions to follow up or to regulate all this. So the question is, in the lobby room, is there any project that is being developed on global lobby, especially when it comes to these multinationals or these big corporations? And how the governments, the states have to respond. I'm not sure whether these questions make sense, but just a quick example, given like a group, a private group, which is not related to any government, because no government will take endorsement of this group, is committing crimes, international crimes, whether in X country. How to deal with this, and how the lobby could respond to such. These are the questions I'm having, like when we do take on international law and private corporations. Thank you.
Okay, your question is absolutely relevant. And that allows me to clarify a couple of points. First of all, for the purpose of this presentation, the terms advocacy and lobbying are the same. Purely on paper, they are the same. Main differences in terms are cultural, meaning a policy officer from Greenpeace will say he's lobbying. In Europe and also in other countries, since the word lobbying is seen so badly, some people started to use the word advocacy. To me, they are the same. Second point, you rightfully hinted at the international dimension that rules many aspects of a commercial life. Everything I will be talking about today relates to national and international rules. So, meaning, in order to lobby, I need a government. I need someone that makes rules and someone
Andrea, we lost you.
enforces them. However, these are in the area of geopolitics. So in the area of transnational organization.
Andrea,
There are certain rules.
Andrea, we can hear a lot of echo. So, for example, I can share the presentation for you maybe, and you
Politics that don't apply on geopolitics. If Putin one day comes to Crimea, well, it can.
Andrea, can you hear us?
For a while, every member. That's geopolitics, and in a way, applied to that domain.
Andrea, can you hear us? Andrea, can you hear us?
Because should I repeat?
Yeah, we can. Can you hear us, Andrea?
I can. Shall I
Great.
continue?
We couldn't hear you that much. So my suggestion is I can share a screen for you, and you can just speak to us.
Okay. Should I start again? So yeah, so as I was saying that what happened in the area of international law follows different lobbying rules. And the tools that we're going to discuss today relate more to the national and international domain, more than transnational. So yeah, I understand your comment. You know, nobody wants to have predatory or predator corporation that are so impactful and effective. But I would say that's another level of lobbying because it's not technically or so easily implementable on a legislative level because international law it's different from other domains of law that have more structured life cycles. So that can be revised, that can be updated or litigated in court. So yeah, I don't think I will be able to address this part of lobbying, but I'll be happy to provide you with more information or we can just chat on this separately. Now let's get down to lobbying. One of the underlying concept is that lobbying is a very American concept. That also has to do with the way in which the American society is composed. So here, if we want to brutalize society, we know that politics is always there. It's powerful, it controls, it has a legitimacy to create law, to enforce them. Then you have business. Business is always the same everywhere, profit, cost effectiveness. And then civil society wants to be recognized and wants to be integer towards its stakeholders. However, in the European Union, it's completely different. There is a political domain, but this is fragmented in 27 different languages and different culture and approach. So as a matter of fact, we do have European politics, but we don't have a political conscience. consciousness. There's not a European political opinion as such. Business is business everywhere. And then again, what about civil society? Is there a shared sense of European? Actually, this is the question that we're asking.
Andrea, can you hear us? Andrea, can you hear us?
Right now, we're going to have elections soon in May. We see a lot of Eurosceptics,
Andrea, we are
movements coming up. So that's a fair question. There's just a whole bunch of countries. And that brings us to
guys, are you there? Okay, so it seems that
Yeah, I'm here.
The rest of us are here, just Andrea is not.
It just, yeah, he's not clear at all. I couldn't gather anything of what he said.
no one cannot. I asked Andrea to call him on mobile and ask him if we can maybe switch from Wi-Fi to mobile data.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Yes.
Ah, okay, very good.
If you can maybe repeat it. I can share, Andrea, I can share a screen for you. So I will be sharing a screen and you can just speak. And if you can repeat all the things around the European infrastructure, because that was the time you were completely cut. Can you hear us? Can we hear you?
I can hear you.
Great, we can hear you. So I will open up your presentation, but in the meantime, you can continue on a European side and European lobbying, because that was a time when we lost you.
Okay, so I'll start again from Brussels stuff.
Okay.
So this is lobbying in real time. So,
Can you go back to European structure? The second slide after Donald Trump. Yes, and to lobby in European Union.
Very good. Okay, so I was saying that lobby is mostly a US phenomenon, and so that relates it in the way US society is made. So totalizing societally, politics just want to be politics, business just want to be business, and civil society wants to be recognized and integer. The European Union, however, we're still wondering who we are and what we do. And that's why we don't really have as such a political opinion of ourselves. We do have political institutions, we make law, we enforce them, but there's many democratic questions on how representative is the European Union to its citizens and how to talk with them. Business is always business, but also civil society is not really there. You don't have a European consciousness. We think in 27 different languages, in many different ways. And that brings to the question, so what do we want as Europe? So also the system is very different. So that brings us to Brussels, which is just one example of lobbying. It can be DC, it can be Beijing. I happen to know better this one, and in many ways, I think it's a better example of how to manage the domain of lobbying. And this is possible for one reason, because we have a lot of data. Europe is the most transparent political object on the planet. We have information. This information comes from every single meeting that every single functionary had. This information relates to who you are, who do you represent, how much money do you spend in lobbying, how big is your organization, where is it from. You share emails, and every conversation with civil servants is recorded, including the attachment of the emails. So at the end of the day, we have just a whole amount of data that is plotted by this online tool, Integrity Watch, which is a Transparency International tool. So here you see the top 10 organizations in terms of lobbying in the European Union at the moment. You may also wonder, how do you measure lobbying? And that's a very interesting question. How you measure the effect or the impact of a cocktail party? So there are several ways scholars dug into it. One way would be, for example, to check a political draft, like a law, at the beginning of the process, and then you check it at the end by using text recognition software that assess the copy-paste level from draft from lobbyists, for example. Another way of measuring it is in number of contacts. So you see on the left of the screen, the organization that had more or the most contact with the European institution, specifically the Commission. So for example, here you see that Google had a bit more than 200 meetings in 2018. On the right side, you see the category, who are these lobby organizations? And obviously, corporate dominates. But just think that, as a matter of fact, this is exactly how society is made. Most of society is for profit. Actually, most of society is SMEs. European economic environment is composed by 85% by small and medium enterprises. So you do have corporations, and they do the biggest profit, but no, mostly on average, people do normal jobs. And these normal jobs are represented in Brussels. You represent the farmers, you represent the steel workers, you represent the fishermen, you represent the plastic sector, you represent the organic sector. So like in Geneva, like in New York, Brussels is a place where things are represented. Now, from the top of your head, looking at the left side of the screen, do you see anything that strikes you? Is there anything that gets your attention?
Well, as an American, the American Chamber of Commerce to Europe gets my attention. Yeah. But that might not be what you meant.
Anything else?
What is Business Europe? Business
Europe is the European Association of Employers. So it represents everything, from BMW to Barilla to every company you can think. Okay, so what it strikes me is that the top 10 organizations that lobby...
Interesting, actually. WWF is so high, actually, on the list.
Correct. Bingo.
Which, certainly good for them. I mean, if you probably look how many people are employed by NGOs as compared to the rest, this is definitely overrepresentation, which, I mean, it's for the good cause, but I'm just saying.
Bingo. It's exactly
is that the wildlife people?
Excuse me?
WWF, environmental NGO.
Okay, all right. I was thinking World Wildlife Fund.
So that's exactly, if you see the top 10 organization, you see in fact 3 NGO. You see at the third place, the Bureau European, this is consumer, BEUC. Then you see Transport and Environment, that's an umbrella NGO of environmental NGOs. And then WWF. And if you just consider that after, like just before WWF, you have Microsoft. And the magnitude of resources between these two actors is gigantic. And yet they have a similar access to the legislator. So I would normally expect a lot of business, that's fair. But this access is it's something new. And this is exactly the area where we work. Since NGOs are part of this working group, since NGOs are contributing to policy making, they should be good at it. And they should have the same playing field access that bigger corporations would. So here we see, in fact, the 3 NGOs. On the other hand,
I'm sorry to interject, but can I just ask one question?
Yes, please.
defined all of this based on number of contacts. So what does that exactly translate into? Just number of meetings with government officials? Is that it?
Yeah. As I mentioned, it's difficult to measure actual lobbying. How do you measure pressure or the perception of pressure if you are a legislator? There are many ways. A fair way would be to start looking at the number of interaction they have. And this interaction, they're not just meetings. In this graph, you see meetings, but it also relates to the volume of information shared between the authorities and the stakeholder. And yeah, also, you know, how you interpret the result of a law. It depends on your point of view. So also the way in which a law is interpreted may suit you or not. So again, it's a bit difficult to quantify from a scholar perspective lobbying. You can investigate influence, for example, but also that is very fragmented. So yeah, this is just one way of looking at things.
So this has been done by Integrity Watch from what I could recollect, right? I mean, so Integrity Watch is something that's owned by the state?
No, Integrity Watch is the tool that shows and plots data coming from the Transparency Register, which is a feature of the European Public Administration System that now is being enlarged of its scope as to include the work of all the institutions, so not just the Parliament or the Commission.
Okay.
And again, access to buildings and access to legislator, it's a good way to look at it. Of course, it's just partial. Now, any other question? So again, so you see a lot of NGO in this activity and they have a fair access to the policymaker. On the other hand, I know that business will still be business. And so Google, of course, lobbies on its own, but Google is also a member of Business Europe, is also a member of Digital Europe, is also a member of the American Chamber of Commerce to the European Union. So business will still be predominant simply because it has more resources, has more money. And that's why it's even more striking that NGOs have such a high access. So we act at this point. We open and enlarge the niche that NGOs carved in this lobbying environment. And we do so by professionalizing and bettering NGOs at their job. In a way, it's not that business is overrepresented. Business will always be overrepresented. It's civil society that is underrepresented, and it lacks the tools to do better. So I'm just about to show you the tool. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. This is the Citizen Lobbyist Toolkit. This is not rocket science, in many ways common sense, but it gives you an idea of what it means to think like a lobbyist. So you start from the top. You take an issue. It can be any issue. It can be plastic in the ocean. It can be LGBT rights. It can be migration. And from the issue, you break it down into a policy action, something that a politician can use, something that can be drafted black and white in a white paper or in a council resolution. So if, for example, your issue is in the area of migration, a good policy action will be to look at, I don't know, the Dublin Treaty that regulates the number of asylum seekers that get redistributed across member states. So instead of saying, I just want to stop the migrant issue, you can say, I want to intervene on the law that regulates it. And then at that point, once you have your policy action, you choose your avenue. Now, NGOs tend to be very good at campaigning. It's what they do. They reach out for members. They have newsletters and they leverage the interest, for example, by boycotting or by raising awareness. But sometimes NGOs are not really good at using the other tools. So, for example, at drafting legislative proposals, at complaining to courts, or, for example, there is a tool that is called FOIA. You see it at the center, at the bottom of the page. This is freedom of access of information. This is a feature that allows a citizen to get a document from the administration, of any kind of document. If you don't like, I don't know, the proposal of Trump on the wall, you get the document. If you don't like how Turkey and Europe sign a deal on migrants, you get the document. And that puts pressure on the legislator, and that shows that citizens are scrutinizing. Then, of course, there are judicial avenues when you challenge the implementation of a certain law. For example, if you cannot fight the extremist position of certain Eastern European countries over migrants, sue them. Sue Hungary for the lack of implementation of basic human rights rules in view of the legal Charter of Human Rights. So you take a very different approach to the very similar issue. And then you have the political avenue, but that's a bit more common. That's meeting with politicians, you write letters, you write open editorials, op-ed, and so forth. So I will now go through all these avenues to give a bit more practical examples. Any question on the toolkit?
Andrea, maybe you can say, what is a meeting letter op-ed? Everyone is familiar with the word op-ed? If you are, it's fine, just asking.
This
if you know what's op-ed.
Open editorial.
Yeah. What's a meeting letter though?
Yeah, maybe you can explain, Andrea. Meeting letter and open op-ed.
Yeah, so these are political tools. A political tool is meeting a politician. A political tool is write a letter to a ministry or an institution. And then op-ed stands for open editorials. These are columnists. These are
yeah.
So it's when you propose something maybe on the major newspaper of a certain country, and you hint at a policy change or at something. Okay, so now we'll go through these avenues. And
Andrea, maybe you said, what is that? I know what's a complaint review and ombudsman, but as we have different nationalities here, for example, what's a FOI? Yes. And also the other stickers, gadget petition, you know, if you think in the terms that we have different countries here, and especially Africa, India, different procedures. So if you can be maybe specific on these tools, if they are also compatible with their laws, you know, let's say.
I'm just about to go through them all.
Cool.
So, NGO, you are very good at campaigning, and this is a tool that we're all familiar with. So that's actually the least interesting part. We all know about campaigning. We all are familiar with how it feels like. A good example of campaigning is in the area of agriculture, for example, organic food, GMO, pesticide, labeling. These are issues that we are used to. Now, let's look at the interesting part. A legislative avenue is when you make a law, and you make it by initiating the process that will lead to a law. A good example of these are petitions. Petitions, they are a bit spread like everywhere in the world. It's basically when you give your information as a citizen, so you provide your ID, and then you sign for something. I specify this because now there's a lot of online campaigning going on. You may be familiar with WeMove or Avas. These are interesting tools that put pressure on the legislator, but they are not legislative tools because they cannot transform themselves into actual laws. So a good way of lobbying, for example, is to write a petition, is to have enough signature to hold accountable the legislative policy system to start a law on something. A good example of these are the European Citizen Initiative, which are a petition system that was built in Europe and that hasn't been really used since. Wait, I see that you guys are writing me. I can't see my chat, guys. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine, Andrea. It's for everyone when I was summing up the meeting letter. It's fine. Go ahead.
So another legislative tool will be the whistleblowing. So when a citizen is pointing at a bad behavior of a company, for example, in the area of financial issues, and that will be also initiating a law. Now we go on the administrative avenues. Now, your question on FOIA is well put. Basically, FOIA stands for Freedom of Access of Information Act. This is a feature of many constitutions that holds for the Europe and US. I actually don't know in how many other countries this is applicable. But basically, it's a file that you can. It's a request for information for specific document that the administration has to share with you when they are of public interest. And they are a very important instrument to put pressure over the institution because it shows that citizens know where to look at. A freedom of access of information could help you to get the expenses sheet of a politician, to track the expenditure of a political party or to see who pays them. So that also helps to have more clarity and transparency on the process. The Ombudsman is a uniquely European instrument. It's an institution that comes from the Nordic legislative tradition. This was invented in Sweden or in Denmark, if I'm not right. The Ombudsman is the defender of citizens. The Ombudsman is an institution that has the power to investigate and to act upon other institutions. If there are frauds or bribes, or if there is a illegal use of funds, the Ombudsman can investigate and can enforce correctment actions. The Ombudsman is there for us. One of the most successful modules that we teach at NGOs is how to file an Ombudsman complaint. This can be on gay rights. This can be on the lack of recycle systems in a city. This can be for improving trade between two countries. And these are administrative tools that normally a citizen will never even know they exist. But that NGOs have the power and the capacity to understand, to make their strategy stronger. So again, the Freedom of Information Act is a very strong tool, and there is an NGO in Brussels called the Corporate European Observatory, CEO, which sole job is to monitor lobbying activities by asking documents. For example, you may remember we had the scandal, the Volkswagen scandal of the emission, when the European Commission found that Volkswagen was frauding in the reporting of the emission of their cars. So this is where this NGO, Corporate European Observatory, received or asked the institution to release the communication Volkswagen had with the European Commission to see and check what was actually in play. Another example is the EU-Turkey deal. The European Union pays a whole bunch of money to Turkey every year for Turkey to raise barriers, to Turkey to stop the migrant flow, mostly to Greece. That for many human rights activists was considered a very bad deal because it didn't provide any safeguard to the life and the well-being of these people. And so certain NGOs asked the European institution to share this information, which would normally be confidential since this is diplomacy. So yeah, this is an example of a small legal tool, relatively easy to use, that you can pull in a couple of weeks if you partner up with a lawyer, that can greatly improve your strategy. That's a very other nice example. You see on the live Marine Le Pen. For those who don't know her, she is the head of the extremist right wing party in France. And she was found guilty of paying with European funded money, so money from the European Parliament. She's a member of the European Parliament. And she paid to assistants that were not really working for her. Well, we helped an NGO filing a complaint to the OLAF, the anti-fraud office of the EU. And that basically stopped this behavior. And by the way, we did it during the electoral campaign in France 2 years ago. So that was a fantastic news. So then again, you provide legal support for NGOs to do better their job. and being able to sue and to legally go after their targets. Another avenue is legal challenges. That's a tough one. That's a tough one because it implies litigation, it implies legal drafting, it implies legal assessments. So this is when NGOs really partner up with lawyers. However, these are the file that tends to work the best. In any area from human health to consumer law, those complaints, those rules became jurisprudence, they became a precedent. So usually in this situation, an NGO really stepped up. A good example of this case is a case that happened almost a year ago in Italy. So on the bottom right corner of the screen, you see the happy face of Matteo Salvini, the Minister of Interior of Italy, who had a very bad stand on migrants. In this case, a ship, a Navy ship, so not an NGO ship, a Navy ship, saved more than 70 migrants in the sea. Well, what happened? Minister Salvini used this to blast on Twitter and social media hatred speech and comments. And many NGOs were stupid enough to fight on social media, losing, because government has more means to be powerful online. And so he was gaining many political points. One day, however, after the ship was still waiting to border off and to unload people in Italy, the Tribunal of Agrigento, a city in Sicily, threatened Matteo Salvini of a sue for keeping people without legal background, basically to take them off, basically. And that unlocked the situation, because when a tribunal threatens a civil servant of an administrative action, that tends to be way more powerful when every other NGO tries to raise attention of the public on a certain issue. So that just happened to be one of these examples. Political tools, these are just political tools. These are the easiest one, and they relate more to the communication and campaigning of certain NGOs. So these are not too interesting as such. Very well. So
I would like to maybe ask, Aman is on the call and we were in touch, like, Aman, do you have something like that in India, or you, Olivier, maybe somehow in Africa? I know I'm not an ombudsman, but is there anything like this?
Okay, so in India, hang on, we actually had a massive public protest. This was sometime around, I think, 2012, which lasted for about a year. There was a whole momentum to appoint a figure like the ombudsman in India. Okay, and then we even passed a law to appoint the ombudsman, but our government hasn't appointed an ombudsman till yet. I mean, it's been 4 years since the law was passed for the appointment of the ombudsman, but hasn't been done. The problem is, and that's what I also was curious to ask you guys, is that the ombudsman is supposed to be a very neutral person and very independent person, right? So if it's a government appointment, then what's likely to happen is that the opposition is going to allege that because the government appointed this person, clearly this person is compromised and he's not going to go against the government or take action against the corruption of the government, right? Which brings us to the point that the suggestion in India was that we should get the ombudsman with the consent of the government and the opposition party, right? And if it's very hard for both of them to work together, because for them to agree on a particular person is going to be politically very, very challenging. And the other problem is, even if they both come on board, what might happen is, so for example, both of the parties are corrupt. So they both would agree on a figure who would be compromised on both sides. So in even that case, he or she may not be so independent. So what I'm curious to know is, in your country, how does it really work? Because if the government appoints an ombudsman, don't the other people question why that this person, or cast aspersions on that person? Because clearly it's a government appointment, so it has to be political, and it would be just a person who could be a proxy for the government, right? Who would
If I may, indeed, that's a risk. But let's not forget that tribunals are still there. The judiciary system is still there. Normally, the ombudsman will go after administrative incongruities, in administrative issues, definitely not into penal issue. And anyway, it's not up to the ombudsman to go after the whole corruption and all the bads in government. Tribunals are still there. So
Right.
if anything, they are an instrument, or they should be an instrument that are closer to the citizen. So they simply lower access to justice. But indeed, the judicial system it has the prerogative of going after corruption and fraudulent behavior.
Right.
Other questions?
No, I'm good.
So yes, it was a lot of information, and I don't expect you to have it all, but all these examples or all these elements point at the figure of the citizen lobbyist, which in a way can be distinguished by other form of activism because of the target. So the recipient of the lobby action tends to be a legislator or a public authority. The method is through grassroots, bottom-up, integer, authentic forms of participation. And obviously this has a systemic change, meaning that when you impact the law or the legislative environment of a certain theme, that tends to stuck. This leads to impact. And this impact is leveraged by people that can follow politics better. The thing is that you don't want everyone to follow politics. Not everybody might have the same time or capacity to be updated on every single issue. But in general, if we share this burden, if we share this responsibility, you tend to do better job. Because you make the policy process accountable, because you let them know that you're watching. And that also produce a better policy system, because people vote better and people care. That's a crucial point, for example, in Europe at this point, because if there is a trend in electoral systems, is that people don't vote as much. And for example, only now, and this is January, only 40% of Europeans are aware that there are elections in May. And of those people, not everybody is likely to go voting. For example, certain member states like Slovakia might be having an electoral turnout of 18%. It means that only, let's say, 2 people of 10 go voting. So what kind of representativeness you provide with this? So this...
I have a question.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's going to be probably less than, did you say 18? 1/8?
Yes.
That is very ambitious, actually.
Well, see, exactly.
Last time we had 13. And according to the survey they made, it was 14 in the survey. So if it was 14 or 15, it would be actually a 6. It's really sad. I mean, this is one of the saddest things currently about the political situation or citizens activism or activation in Slovakia. It's almost non-existent in relation to the European Parliament elections.
That is true, but in another sense, why would you blame them? I mean, they see there's no change, they vote a party, then next year they vote another one, and then no change again. And also, if you think about it, we vote once in a while. We vote every 4 or 5 years, whereas someone would say that there's no better there's no better place to look for what people want than simply Twitter, meaning people's opinion on stuff. It's monitored regularly every day, also because of the use of social media. So when you go voting, you just want to have, let's say, a stamp. When there is low electoral representativeness in Europe, it's a bit like in Russia. When you know that Putin is going to be re-elected, so it must be good electoral turnout to prove that Putin is good. So Europe is going to continue next day, and so it needs legitimacy from the ground that allows it to say, I'm ruling you. Because as a matter of fact, Europe is very strong, and almost 60% of every law that gets implemented in member states comes straight from the EU. But this is something that a politician will never tell you. A national politician will never tell you only, I will just vote, I will just make a law every 3 because all the others come from Europe. And from my point of view, as an Italian, that's a good thing. Because, for example, my country wasn't ready or wasn't able to produce such a good amount of law in environmental standards, in consumer protection. So in general, I would say that's a good thing. And a low electoral turnout, it's a pity, but it's a trend that we need to consider anyway. Because when people don't go voting, usually those who go vote might also be extremists. And so yeah, that raises question. So do go vote and convince 10 of your friends to go vote. And that's it.
Okay, can I just ask you guys one question? I'll keep it short. So, so you mentioned something around 18%. So is 18% the like of the total population is the one that exercises vote, or 18% of the people who are eligible to vote show up to vote?
No, this is the electoral turnout of Slovakia, a small Central European country. And that
right, but is the 18% the number of
people that go voting
from total population of Slovakia?
Yes.
Or the total people who are eligible to vote in Slovakia?
Yes.
But okay, are these things different in your country? Like people who are eligible to vote and people who like people who are living in that country, because a lot of people may not have the voter ID and things like that. Is that not an issue?
I see what you mean, but that's not the case for this specific country.
Okay. Okay.
Very well. So at this point, I would normally take one of your projects or take one of your ideas, being in a workshop, and we will try to work it out together with these points that we saw. So the avenues of participation and all these instruments. But sort of time is limited, so I need to compress this into this concept. So, as I try to explain, I think, or I like to think, that lobbying isn't really nothing new or nothing strange. It's just a way of communicating that happens to be structured in a way that we can measure it in terms of law, but relates to power and to people and to interest. So as such, has the potential to be extremely impactful. And the pity is that many people cannot access it because of this knowledge gap or legislative barrier that wouldn't be too difficult to overcome if we would have some basic element of civism, element of civic education, just to know what's available. And that can be extremely impactful for better policymaking. So guys, at this point, I don't know, maybe we can do a quick Q&A. Hello?
Yeah, we're with you.
Yeah.
Earlier, Andrea, you mentioned the possibility of doing like taking one of our projects as like a little case study?
Yes, normally if we have a room like of 30 people, you will split up in 3-4 groups, and you will ask these people to come up with a project. So it could be either their own NGOs, or it can be a political issue they really strongly care for. And then we would start developing a lobby strategy based on unconventional or less understood political action, like campaigning or using this legal instrument. That's usually interesting because it forces people a bit out of their comfort zone, especially when you are an experienced advocate or an experienced NGO connoisseur. But it's just point at the fact that in many ways lobbying is a way of seeing things. Again, this is not a hard science. This is not physics. It's just being able to interpret the political reality of a specific political object. Can be Brussels, it can be Rome, it can be Washington, and relate with the many actors that compose civil society. One of the things that many NGOs tend to forget is that they are not the whole civil society. They represent a part of society. The rest of society is also composed of corporations, of companies, of professionals, of universities, and they also can contribute. Until now, there was a prerogative of organization to lobby or to be heard by policymakers. But also because of the more transparency, internet, I think this lowered access to political participation to an extent that we don't really know where it is going. In Europe, they're trying to include elements of electronic democracy. Voting by click. The biggest party in Italy, the 5 Stars movement, produces law with an internal system of likes. So they have their own software. They have an instrument that their voters can use to propose a law, to vote a law, like you would have in Reddit. And so we don't see really how this is going to evolve, but we see a lot of work on social media.
Andrea, but maybe that could be good to also use this time. Also, Catherine was suggesting we could still pick up. We have projects around here, so maybe if someone had a project to put it now, and we can really discuss it a little.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's great, as you said, like it's a great space. So anyone that has something specific or some project, we could work on it. Like Olivier has a nice project on refugees. Catherine is running. Maybe Aman has a project. So we could use this time as well for practical.
I know, no, of course. The only challenge being a webinar is that either we all work on a single project or we all present our own. So it's either one or everyone's.
Whatever, like say as one. Like Catherine is writing one.
Okay, then let's pitch us your idea, and let's try to break it down according to the lobby rules.
So can you open it as? Catherine, you had an idea.
No, I don't, but I know other people do, so I just want other people to get. I think mine's too esoteric. Mine's too esoteric at the minute.
What's yours? It's esoteric. Like I don't know what's esoteric in that.
I mean, I plan on running in like 3 or 4 years in a U.S. election. That's as far as that project goes. But I know Olivier is doing really interesting stuff in Africa, and Aman, we just met online. So I'd love to see someone who has a more concrete project, get a little coaching.
Okay, I have one idea. I'm not sure if we could do this as part of the project, but there is this problem. Okay, there's this issue that came up last year in India. There was a strong pro-net neutrality protest in India that happened last year. And there were a lot of young startup so India has a very vibrant startup ecosystem, okay? Technology startup ecosystem. So the tech startup ecosystem of India sort of ensured that Indian telecom operators uh, retain net neutrality, and they're not able to uh, throttle traffic or give preferential treatment to certain kind of different version of the internet. And what Facebook was trying to do in India was trying to push a Facebook only internet, which means they'll give internet connection to poor people who can only access Facebook on that internet connection and not anything else. Okay, and the software lobby in India, the startup lobby, they said that is not good and that's bad for Indian internet in the long term, because if people use an internet which only gives them access to one website, then that's not fair. Like, that's anti-net neutrality. Does that make sense? Is that something that you guys like relate with? Okay.
I think that's a cool example.
Did you guys hear that? I mean, I'm not sure.
And yes, I heard that. And Andrea's off mute.
Oh, I was just waiting you for. I thought we were continuing. No, I think Facebook has a lot to say and a lot to explain in many countries anyway. So it's a good example because at least it's very horizontal. Where to start? Well, for example, an exercise will be to think all the actors that are impacted by this process. So you correctly mentioned the startup sector or lobby. Might be also interesting to see if teachers or representative of students or parents might want to join. A good practice that we use in Europe, might be true in India as well, is called coalition building. So you don't ask something on your own, even when you're an NGO, and if you're pointing an energy transition, you just don't go alone. Many other actors are asking the same thing. So you pool resources and you maximize your. Something else to do is to check maybe imbalances within the government. When we think about government, we think about one thing, but actually government is an entity composed of many different souls, sometimes with very contrasting interests. So maybe the Ministry of Labor would have a certain view on the issue, but the Ministry of Family or the Culture might see in a different way, or also within the ministry. You would see a lot of differences. So what you can do is leverage this aspect. Then this is an issue that has a magnitude big enough to maybe to challenge or inquire a court. That can be a WTO court, so a World Trade Organization court on this is a monopoly. You would be making a cartel. So this might be anti-monopoly rules, antitrust rules. So there is also competition law aspects. Last but not least, we could consider the condition of rural areas, which tends to be represented. Honestly, I don't know in India. In Europe, rural areas are extremely represented. We represent regions. So see, you have exactly the same issue, but you can add many components to it. And all in all, and all together, go into a bigger strategy. So if we would follow the avenue of participation, the first block of the slide, you would do a campaign on this use of Facebook as an only source for accessing internet. But for example, something that we suggest in NGO is to campaign at the end of your campaign. For example, if you manage to get through a petition that asks India teachers and students to sign against this, you could write a campaign to let everybody know when this law will pass, so that people would be active on social media or would be commenting while the government is voting this law. Another idea following this example would be to ask the Indian government for documents of the negotiation between Facebook and the government, maybe the regional authorities, because this industry needs to have contracts in place. I want to see how much they pay. As I mentioned, you can use legal challenges, mostly in commercial tribunals. Maybe Google has something to say to Facebook in this area. And then, yeah, you could use political elements of meetings, letters to challenge a politician. What do you think?
Yeah, that's precisely what happened. So eventually, they were able to get the government to stop Facebook from launching that product in India. And like you said, making alliances is one of the most important aspect of it. So what these startup entrepreneurs did was they partnered with a lot of stand-up comedians and YouTubers and people who had influence on the internet, right? And they were able to create a lot of noise on the internet and to mobilize a movement against Facebook. And then Facebook eventually, the government eventually stopped Facebook from launching that product.
Yeah, you use all the tools all together, basically. That's maximum pressure.
As we are like a little bit at time already, 4 minutes, I would like also maybe to encourage you that you would stay in touch with Andrea, and maybe Andrea to think maybe about some questions we have to think about in each of our cases, because every one of us has some project to deal with. And also Olivier, also Catherine, also Adam, also us. And we could address them in the Facebook group, or you could address them directly to Andrea. He's in our Facebook group. So if you have any questions, it would be great now. If you have anything that you really have to say or ask, take it now. Or we could leave the last words to Andrea if you want to summarize, or if you have anything in your mind that you want to summarize up, as we really are committed to like finish on time, and we are already 5 minutes over the time, and it's too late for Aman as well. So Andrea, anything you want to say as a last things, or anything of any one of you wants to add to this?
No, again, just thank you again all for your
Maybe
vision.
I could comment very briefly.
Oh, yes, please.
Yes.
No, I just want to say, Andrea, I'm really impressed. I mean, I think it's great that there are organizations like yours that kind of balance, let's say, maybe the powers of the businesses and the sphere. And I was very intrigued by one of the points in the first slides, where you actually show that there are examples where the businesses do work together with NGOs. We haven't really discussed that into more detail, but maybe that would be interesting to understand better in the future how that collaboration can work.
Yeah, if you could even give examples of or case studies of examples where businesses have actually backed maybe NGOs or a public movement, right? And they've been able to get through legislations and things like that.
Yeah, there's plenty, and there are good examples. So one of the most recent example we saw is Brexit. When you saw companies actually going out, writing editorials on journals and magazines, asking for staying in the union, because that's bad for business, because you're disrupting the internal market. In some ways, the wave of CSR, corporate social responsibility, so company paying for their externalities, companies paying for the local communities they work with, there are good examples of that. But still, when it's a corporation, that makes people feel a bit uncomfortable. I will close with one example. So you're familiar with the the World Health Organization, WHO. That's an agency of the United Nations.
Mhm.
So the WHO runs through, member states chip in, so they pay for the agency to run. But also donors and philanthropists can chip in. And for example, a big donor of WHO is Bill Gates through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So on one hand, you have this guy, any NGO would say, who is he to dictate the agenda of the WHO? Who is he? Is he a legitimate actor to take a stand on this position? On the other hand, this guy eradicates polio by 2020. So you have recognition and impact. For many years, NGO needed recognition because if you don't show what you did, you don't get money next year, and it's fair. On the other hand, impact tend to be sort of more important. And now we live in a society where we live of paradoxes. So the country that pollutes the most in the planet is also the country that invests the most in renewable energy, and that's China. That can also be said for many oil companies that are still developing new tools simply because they have the money to do so. But in the end of the day, these are the tools that spill over and produce positive externalities. So we are in an era where countries are bigger. That companies are bigger than countries. So these are just another kind of actors. It's not more or less legitimate. Okay, you don't vote, but you buy it. A good example is, why would SpaceX or Amazon Blue fly to the stars? That's a prerogative of government, having the money to go to the moon. Now it's a private endeavor. So it is just normal that there will be a lot more of brands around, and that's simply nothing we can do about it. Government will be less and less powerful. Some governments, because someone in a twisted reality might say that China has a full control over its companies. So it might be that this very geopolitical scenario gives benefits, or authoritarian regimes tend to perform a bit better, which is not necessarily true throughout history. Usually the democracy and liberalism makes more economics, which translate on average on better quality of life. But this can simply be a phase. For half of a century, the rest of the world was stuck into a Cold War between two poles, and now we have several poles. So that's also a phase in geopolitics. There's nothing wrong with it. It was some scholars call it pre-concertation, like in Europe after Napoleon. So with many countries splitting the world and resources. So it's just changing, and communication changes. And when communication changes, lobby changes, because lobby is just as a byproduct of just communication.
If you will have any resources for us, any links or something, you could post it into the group so we can go through them.
Yeah.
And also, we are having this kind of session on business and politics in the end of February. So before that, we can also kind of involve you, and we can communicate on it, because it's a whole new topic. And maybe it's great you open it up, because we could have another session on this.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other comments? Last ones, because otherwise we will stick to already over the deadline. I don't want to be pushy, just the way that we need to learn this mastery.
Just a big thank you to Andrea for your expertise, and Andrea and Luca for facilitating, and Aman for staying up past 1 a.m.
Yes, big thanks. And all the other questions, Andrea, you are with us in a Facebook group, if I'm right. Of course. So please, anyone you have a bigger questions, let address it to Andrea. You can share with him. You can WhatsApp him. He's a great man and with a great access to any social media. So Olivier, also, if you have a question, please address it, because also your question was partially not answered because of the interruption of the signal. So I would really recommend that you will connect with Andrea and you will use it. Also, Aman, Andrea, Adam, anyone. And Luca, want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage everyone to use for this kind of discussions, the Facebook group, because you can also discuss one-on-one, but it's always better when you share your questions in the group on Facebook, because then everyone can also see and learn from what you are asking and from the responses. So just feel free to whatever you want to ask, put it there, and we can also discussion there.
And thank you, Andrea, again, because it was really intense and it was like a lot of information. I hope you can share also this presentation then, if you say so, and also the recording so everyone can have an information. And thank you everyone for being late night, early night on Friday and lobbying for good causes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a good weekend. Have a good night, and see you soon. Then there is no session next week.
Andrea, we should have drinks at Place Luc sometime.
Oh,
absolutely, absolutely. Soon.
The part. So take care, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. See you in 2 weeks, guys. And
take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Andrea. Thank you very much. Bye.